in order to have like deeply meaningful, healthy, sustainable, enriching connection, which I think is the point of relationship. It's like something I say to clients all the time is like further together faster. Like in a relationship, it should be adding, like you guys should be better together than you are on your own. I deeply believe like a large percentage of people out there like are not in the highest experience of relationship that they could have. And it's because of things like that, like self-love. And again, going back to my podcast name, I really love myself. Like self-love is to me is an expression of the divine, where it's like when you value yourself, when you value other people, you are meant to like really take your energy very seriously and protect that energy. You deserve better. Like everybody deserves better. And we're all capable of that, you know?
Welcome to the Repatterning Podcast, where we believe your mind-body system is your domain and that choosing the beliefs, habits, and patterns that best support you is your birthright. I'm your host, Arden Lee, creator of the Repatterning Project, an 8-week course in learning to free yourself from the patterns of your past and program your mind for your dreams of the future. Join me for these extraordinary conversations as we unpack the keys to creating our reality. Welcome back to the Repatterning Podcast. I'm your host, Arden Lee, and I'm so excited to introduce today's guest. Her name is Gianna Rackham, and she is a love and relationship and leadership coach for spiritually aware women. If you like what you hear in our conversation today, you can check out her website at giannalightworker.com. You can also check out her Instagram. Her handle is Gianna Love and Light. And she also has a new program coming out called Iconically Single. And it's for women who have either recently been through a breakup or maybe they've been single for a little while. And it's about finding that self-worth and confidence and your joy and your deep love of life so that when you do get into a partnership, you're not going to settle for anything less than what really sets your heart on fire. So definitely check that out if you like her work and you like our conversation. And she and I have been friends online for a little while. I was very honored to be featured on her own podcast called I Really Love Myself. So definitely check out her podcast as well if you like our conversation. And of course, last but not least, she is the Enid to my Wednesday. And I'm so excited to chat here because I'm also just like looking forward to us catching up too. It's been a while since we've gotten to have a full conversation. So welcome to the Repatterning Podcast. Tell folks a little bit about what your work is and what you do.
Thank you so much, first of all. And like, to speak about Arden in front of Arden, I just have so much respect and admiration for Arden and her work. And, you know, we connected online like years ago and she has truly become a friend. And she is just such a great person. So I'm just so honored to have had you on my podcast and to be on yours. And yeah, we definitely have like the Wednesday Enid to like get it going like when we're together. So it's so fun.
This might be the only time I've seen you not wearing pink, actually.
I know. And you know why? It's because I have specifically black and white earrings on. I had to like tie it together. but yeah, definitely a lot of pink in the wardrobe for sure. But yeah, so as far as my work goes, you know, I originally started doing relationship coaching like a bit over 10 years ago, and I got into it pretty early and pretty young because I really do consider my childhood just like a crash course and like understanding like the fundamental basics of how to have like a healthy relationship experience in your life because I was just so like entrenched in the opposite. And I just really, really had to figure that stuff out and heal it at a very young age. And over the years, like my work has grown and evolved as I have. And a lot of the work that I tend to do with women is largely around relationship work where we, you know, confront patterns around like self-worth and codependency. And a lot of the women that I work with like lean a bit more in a feminine energetic. And so I help them kind of like deconstruct where they might not be in their most authentic expression of that energy so they can really be in alignment with attracting the kind of partnership that they want. But over the years, like that work has also evolved into an element of leadership coaching because a lot of the women that I work with tend to be like high achievers. A lot of them are business owners. And a lot of those relationship patterns, as I'm sure Arden can speak to so well, don't just translate into romantic relationships. It's also like relationships as a whole, right? And so when we have these patterns of like people pleasing, like self abandonment, over giving, like validation seeking, and that like manifests into our career relationships, those relationships can get dysfunctional and really be a drain on our energy. And also can impact like our authentic expression of our purpose and even impact and like our income as well and like hold it back. And so I found my work evolving into that like area as well over the years. But yeah, I mean, I find like our relationships impact so much and the way that we are in relationship impacts so much of our quality of life, and not just our quality of life, especially it impacts future generations, especially if you go on to have children. And that's something that in particular I feel really passionate about because, as a child, I grew up in like domestic violence and just like witnessing addiction and, you know, narcissistic abuse and financial abuse. And so it's become something helping women have like healthy sovereignty, but also connection and interdependence has been something that is just invaluable to me. So I just love this work so much.
Yeah, something that I've always admired about your work, and I'll just say this like for our listeners. Some of my listeners, perhaps who have like been with me for a while or just who know of my history, know that I used to be a dating coach back in the day. And
Hmm.
I left that field because what was funny about it was like when I wrote my book back in the day, a book called The New Rules of Attraction. As soon as it came out, I felt like I had painted myself into a corner because all of a sudden there were like all of these sort of articles or book reviews about me. And I was like, yay, like publicity. This is great for my book. But all of them were like, the woman who can get any man she wants. Like this whole thing, I was like, oh my God, what do I do now if I fail? And so I actually had like a lot of my, I mean, I was young and whatever, but like I had a lot of my sort of like am I good at this? Like tied up in whether I was winning the approval of the person that I desired. And that obviously like that led to some overlearning of those patterns that was ultimately not healthy, right? Like it's great to have like
Yeah.
a structure, like know how to create a conversation. Like there were valuable things about my work if you like approach it with a playful spirit and like a this is fun. Let me like expand my skill set. Let me like try and connect with people or whatever. But the minute
Hmm.
you put that value on whether I can get the person I want is like whether or not I'm a fraud. I was like, "Oh my god." And when I came across your
Yeah.
work, Gianna, like what I love about it so much is that I've seen you at this point in like 2 different relationships and also single,
Hmm.
and you have never ever linked the value of either yourself or your work to whether you're with a partner. And you're so clear on the fact that it really is about how much you love your own life and how much you love yourself and how much you're in alignment. And when you're in alignment, you will naturally attract things that joy and that passion for life like draw in, right? You will call in the right kind of partner. You will call in the right thing. And even if you're not with a partner right now, like then that's fine. Like that there's nothing about that defines you. And that fact that it is that inner alignment that is going to lead to those soulmate connections, right? Or to those just
Hmm.
really super aligned connections with another person. And so I've seen you do this work and you were actually like at the time, because as you said, like we've known each other online for a little while now. At
Yeah.
that time, I remember being like, this is maybe one of the only love and relationship coaches I've ever seen that doesn't put that emphasis on you need to get the guy. Like every all the books out there, like the books from the 90s, the books from the 2000s, like even, like Matthew Hussey and people like that. And like I know the person who taught Matthew Hussey is a friend of mine named Adam
Yeah.
Lyons. At least one of the people who taught Matthew Hussey. And I back in the day like I read some of his content out of curiosity. And it's actually like
Hmm.
not half bad, but it doesn't
Right.
all of it is still like, I'm going to get you this result. You are going to get the man, right? Get the like the
Hmm.
rules, right? Get the ring on the finger. Like, it's just and it's so that attachment to outcome is like the opposite of what actually is healthy. So I'd love for you
Yeah.
to share like more about that principle that you stand by because I think it is the key defining factor actually that puts your work into such a place of integrity.
Thank you so much for saying that. And like, I love that we're able to have like this conversation with a lot of like background context because we've known each other for so long. Like when we first met, like I was in a relationship with someone who I got engaged to, that I was with for a while, and it was a very about 8 years, and it was a very like beautiful, like healthy relationship. But ultimately, like I outgrew it as I was kind of like refining like what I really wanted and needed in terms of like specific partner qualities versus like the fundamental foundation. Like, 'cause that was stuff I deeply understood very early on. Again, just because of like childhood stuff where it's like the fundamental, like healthy foundation. I just have like the deep belief and the deep knowing that like, I've always used the word like soulmate partners and like, sometimes it's like we need relationships to come into our lives to kind of show us and like help us refine our sense of self. And sometimes that's like highlighting wounds or traumas or insecurities that we need to address. And sometimes it's helping us refine like our specific preferences in terms of like lifestyle and like partnership qualities. And I really am like anti the narrative that it's like relationship endings are a failure or like being single is like a dirty word or embarrassing or shameful. Because I think that when we, first of all, it's just bullshit. It's not true, for one. But second of all, I think that when we take that on, we start to seek connection from a really disempowered place that's also inauthentic. It's not from this place of like choosing someone who truly is like a really good fit for you in your life and vice versa. It's I can't be alone or like I don't want to be alone or like I need a relationship or to be married in order to feel like I matter or like I'm not failing or that there's not something wrong with me. And like I think when we go into because I'm of the deep belief personally, and don't get me wrong, I've worked with so many women over the years that have, like, actively been trying to get into relationships for, like, 10 to 20 years, and it's been hard, and that's, like, a different story. But I think in general, most people can get into a relationship, but it's not necessarily, like, a high quality, healthy, deeply fulfilling, like, match of a relationship, and so I think that when we are kind of, like, desperate to be in a relationship, we tend to kinda, like, lower our standards, and we start to kinda, like, lie to ourselves and self-abandon, and to in order to have that, and it maybe, like, soothes those insecurities and wounds, but like, in the long-term bigger picture of life, it really like you were saying before we got on the podcast, like, the longer you get on a train going in the wrong direction, like, you're gonna have to come that, like, that far back, to get back on track, so to speak, and I just really think it's not worth it, it's not worth it to, like, build a life with someone that really doesn't match you and requires, like, self-abandonment, and I'm not talking about, like, healthy compromise, but I'm talking, like, you have to abandon, like, authentic things that you need and want that you could have with the right person, and also too, it's like you model that for your children and your future children if you have kids, right? And, like, you also just, like, radiate that vibration into the collective consciousness and, like, fuck that. You know what I mean? Like, no, like, it's just not required, and so I think it's really important to be able to have in order to have, like, deeply meaningful, healthy, sustainable, enriching connection, which I think is the point of relationship. It's like something I say to clients all the time is like further together faster. Like in a relationship, it should be adding, like you guys should be better together than you are on your own. But it doesn't mean that you're missing anything. It doesn't mean that like on your own you suck or that your life isn't amazing or that like you're incomplete, right? But it's like a lot of the times I deeply believe like a large percentage of people out there like are not in the highest experience of relationship that they could have, and it's
Oh,
because
yeah.
of things like that. And so, I don't know, like, self-love and again, going back to my podcast name, I really love myself, like, self-love is to me is an expression of the divine where it's like, when you value yourself, when you value other people, you are meant to, like, really take your energy very seriously and protect that energy, and, like, when and especially if you're, like, a spiritually aware person who has, like, a purpose in this lifetime, like, you need that. You need that clear head, you need that creative energy, you need that space to be able to like birth whatever it is that you're here to do in this life. And if your relationships are like tugging on your energy too much or like even holding you back and draining you, like that does impact like what I believe like what your soul came here to do in this lifetime. And like you deserve better. Like everybody deserves better and we're all capable of that.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that, and I've definitely been that person who stayed in a relationship that was not right for me out of scarcity. I was a very late bloomer in life, so
Yeah.
I had those feelings of like, well, it takes me a long time to get into a relationship. I'm very picky about who I'm attracted to, so it's hard
Hmm.
for I can go and I figure out later in life, I'm like, "Oh, I also have ADHD," which means in some ways I was self-medicating with crushes. Like
Yeah.
crushes would stimulate dopamine,
Mhm.
and they would give me like a sense of like purpose and a sense of like a reason to be alive. And without that, I would feel like I can't get anything done. Like there's no like what's the point, you know? And so I
Mhm.
not knowing that it was like quite literally a neurochemical thing that was going on for me, I would be like, I have to at least have like, even if I'm not in a relationship, that's fine. But I have to have like a crush, like something I'm working toward, you know, someone that I like, so I can be this best version of myself that I get to be when I feel motivated. And it wasn't, gosh, it wasn't until honestly like, I think 2021 that I made the connection between the dopamine deficiency and my anxious attachment. I'm like, no wonder I would get anxious like about the idea of not having anyone there because all of a sudden it's like feeling like I'm locked in a room with the air being sucked out, you know? Like
Yeah.
Jesus. And then I figured out I was like, "Oh, well, if it's a dopamine thing, can I just find other sources of dopamine?" And, you
Yeah.
know, practicing magic, making music, all of those kind of things. I'm like, I'm so 100% there with you on like, if you're in a relationship that is you're turning a blind eye to the things that are not working and not just like problems to figure out or whatever, but like long-term lack of compatibility or like you had this spark of attraction in the beginning and now you can't like let go of it. You want it to be something more, but it's actually not lasting you past the honeymoon phase because there's nothing that was there beyond that surface attraction. And like, it's
Yeah.
so hard. So I'm right there with you. I'm so glad that you've made that a part of your work.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And I love what you brought up with like neurodivergency because it's like something that I really believe is that, we should be whoever like we feel called to be in this life. But I think that we are also like uniquely our own expression of self and it's perfect and there's nothing wrong with that. And like, but it's really about having like the conscious agency and choice to like around your relationship decisions and like I think what you're describing with, like, the dopamine, I think a lot of people can relate to that, like, whether they identify as, like, neurodivergent or not, because it's like I find with my clients who are, like, codependent or have codependent tendencies, there's just such a unconscious habit of, like, seeking that, like, dopamine, that joy, and, like, also that self-worth and that significance, and also that, like, regulation and security, like, through other people. And it's such a powerful thing to be able to learn, and this is, like, a big part of the work that I do with people fundamentally around relationships, is to be able to what I like to call is, like, self-source, right? Like, self-source, like, consciously those things that we have felt, like, a bit, like, dependent upon relationships for, like, from a place of that causes us to kinda, like, abandon, like, what we really need for that season of life or, like, abandon certain standards in order to try to get that, like, dopamine or validation or, like, whatever it is. That's super important, and I love that you were able to make that connection and be like, "Okay, like, my dopamine gets to, like, come from, like, magic and, like, music and, like, these other things that, feel nourishing and give back," and it's, like, this reciprocal, healthy relationship that doesn't require you to have to like be funneling energy into a connection that may not be like bear fruit or have a return that feels valuable to your life. So I think that that's freaking awesome. And I love the way you put it.
I'm just curious, what when you work with women who are stuck in that pattern where
Mhm.
they're getting that joy or that dopamine from the crush, from the relationship, or whatever that is, I'm curious what sort of things you advise them to get that joy from that are not dependent on partnership. Like if someone was in that pattern, what kind of things would you encourage them to explore?
Everybody's a little bit different, but like what I like to do is help them pinpoint like the emotional need that they're getting from that person, right? And so sometimes it usually boils down to like a handful of things. It's usually like security, it's like dopamine, joy, like happiness, fulfillment, etc., or like a sense of significance or like, like value and, self-worth. And then it's like kind of do a little bit of an audit in your day-to-day life and like thought process and also lifestyle that where this is like actively where you're actively feeling the opposite or where you're craving to feel more of this feeling in general. And so that can like lead to a whole like rabbit hole of like these deeper things that maybe people have been using unconsciously anyways, using like a romantic partnership to like distract themselves from like for example, I'll give you 2 examples because I think both are gonna be important. So when I was younger, I had an eating disorder, right? So I had just under eating, like that over exercising, like those kinds of things. And it was like my if anybody that knows anything about eating disorders knows a lot of the times those things manifest as a way to try to have control, which was made perfect sense for me in my childhood. Like I didn't have a sense of control. And so that's what something I could control with myself. And I had these like chronic, when I was younger, these chronic like body image insecurities. And this would like pop up in my dating life where it's like I would unconsciously like default expect like men to not be attracted to me, which is like crazy. I'm just kidding. But, like, and so like I would just be like waiting for a response from them, and I would just be like on this anxious edge. That would be like really distracting, and I would just be like seeking that and like putting my energy there. And what I really needed to do, which I did eventually, is like bring the focus back to myself to like address the fact that like my day-to-day life, like in my head, like I would look in the mirror every day and be like, ew, like I would be criticizing myself. Like I would be having all this anxiety around like the way that I ate that day or like whether or not I worked out hard enough and like I should just go work out more and like and it was just this thing, this like self-abuse, right? And like that I really found empowered me a lot in my romantic life was to address that and like really move through those patterns once and for all. And like another example that I want to share is like, because I see this a lot with clients. A lot of the times it's like women who don't love their life, right? Like maybe they took a career path that takes up so much of their time and energy. They have a lot of burnout. They have like, maybe they work in the medical field or in law or like in, the way that they run their business if they're a business owner or like they work in the corporate world and there's like this abusive work culture or like, they tend to like self-abandon and just exhaust themselves like day to day out of like people pleasing. And so it's like their life in general is just unfulfilling. And so, it's like they are seeking, they hyper fixate on like the romantic partner or like the situationship or whatever it is as a way to like kind of compensate for that. And so they kind of feel powerless in the connection to be able to like hold those standards where they're respecting themselves because it's like they kind of feel like they need that to feel okay because they don't feel okay in their life. They don't like their life. And so it's like, something that I've done through relationship work has like helped clients start businesses, like help them like, regulate themselves like in like when they're working on Wall Street and they like the toxic work culture, like being able to like set boundaries and like not take certain things personally and like regulate themselves through those things to manifest like different career opportunities and experiences and just different emotional experiences in the environment. So that way it's like they can approach their dating life with more like personal power. Does that make sense?
I love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking also because I know that you've also started working with women around business. And like you were
Mhm.
saying before, our patterns, if they show up in our love lives, like I have this saying I love to talk about in the repatterning project, the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. And
Mhm.
I know it feels like a real blanket statement, but it's one of those phrases where even when I think it's not true, like I always like keep finding more and more evidence of it being true. And I know for me,
Mhm.
starting the repatterning project, like, I had worked as a dating coach before, but I'd never really fully committed to like building a business. It was more of a personal brand, and you can work with me as a coach, like if you happen to find me through my blog or whatever. And when I started the repatterning project, the funny thing was I had so many of my own trauma patterns around like having clients come up that I had to deal with kind of like a baptism through fire. And thank goodness, like the repatterning project was important enough to me that I was like, oh no, this is like, I have to get this information out there. So whatever I need to learn, like I need to learn it on the fly. But it was
Mhm.
amazing how, like, yeah, you don't think that it's the same thing, but it really, really is. I had to like and I had to learn to trust myself and be like, "Wait, do I know how to set boundaries? Do I know how to have a healthy transaction that is mutually beneficial to both me and the client?" "Yeah, of course I do." "Okay, well, then let's
Mhm.
just do that." But I had to, like, think myself through it, you know? So I love that you
Yeah.
work with women around those topics too.
Yeah. Because I something like the way that I see business, and obviously like we're both like business owners. But I believe that it's like we create businesses that are, they have a will of their own. There's like a consciousness that's like wanting to manifest into the collective for like collective good, right? And so it's
Oh
like
my god, I love
we
that.
and so thank you. And so we feel called to like birth these programs, these products, these services, and it can be music, it can be art, it can be courses, it can be books, it can be fashion, it can be all these kinds of things and, like, that's what we're supposed to be doing because we feel called to it, we want to, it lights us up, it gives us life, it brings us joy, and like, other people benefit from it and appreciate it, even if it's whether it's deep healing or, like, an aesthetic anchoring piece of art in your home that like holds the frequency of the room for you, right? And so it's like if we are having these like anxious attachment patterns like around clients, or we're, over giving, or we're like self-abandoning like through our transactions, we are not only like harming ourselves, but I believe we're not holding like a healthy energetic standard for the people that we bring in and how we bring them in. And that impacts the experience, right? Of like what, like, because I feel like every business owner like has to go through this in the beginning, but like I know for me in early business, I feel like I wouldn't attract the most, like, ready, empowered clients. They would just be like, "I wanna do anything to get a relationship," and, like, and maybe be, like, a bit penny pinchy, like, disrespectful, like, "Why should I pay you this for that?" And it's like that, like, felt personal to me, like, I would take that personally and be like, "Oh, like, maybe I'm not enough," and so I would, like, wanna overcompensate in some way, and I would overgive, which only just feeds a dysfunctional dynamic, whereas, like, the thing that attracts in people who really, like, value and respect your work and, like, are, like, your soulmate clients, if you will, are people who, like, see what you do and, like, value it and, like, but that and they pay you for it, and it, like, just nourishes their life in some way, but it's required in order to attract that, I believe, like, most of the time, it's like, you have to be respecting yourself, like, you have to be holding those standards. You have to be, like, for lack of a better way to put it, and I don't really like language like this in general, but I'm just kinda being cheeky, which is like, you can't be, like, easy. You know what I mean? Like, and so, because it's like then, like, you have to have standards with who you attract, and that doesn't mean that you get less, it means you get more high quality people, like, and I've had that experience in my business before where it's like, there was a point in time where it's like I'd hit the six-figure level, and I was, like, really wanting and feeling capable of more, and I wanted more, like, I just knew that there was more people I was supposed to be working with, and I wanted to, like, almost double my rates because that's just what felt really in alignment for the level of service I was providing for that particular client experience, and, like, I had to it was funny, I was, like, telling myself, "Okay, like, I'm not even having, like, the level of clients I want when I'm, like, pretty much abandoning myself and, like, what I'm charging and, like, whatever and how much I'm giving. So, like, how could I think that, like, business would be like, pick up even more if I, like, held a higher standard?" And and I stayed in that pattern for a little bit, and then, I finally like, it finally clicked for me where it was like, "Actually, this makes so much more sense because, like, when I'm respecting myself and I'm respecting my work, I'm even more, like, magnetic and attractive to people," and that became the experience, and I, like, nearly doubled my rate and started booking out for the first time ever and, like, repeatedly booked out again and again and again, and I was like, "Damn, I should have done this a long time ago."
Nice. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. It's the same sort of like, well, if I raise my standards, fewer people are going to meet it. Like, it's the same thing that happens in relationships. And I know for me, for a long time, like, the people I was dating in, say, my 20s, there was definitely an element of like, I feel like I am going to feel secure in this relationship because I actually have my life together so much more than this person does. Like, how could they possibly leave someone like me? And the amazing thing that I feel like all people kind of learn as we get a little bit older is that actually it's the people that you lower your standards for who treat you worse.
Mhm, mhm.
Like, it feels like it doesn't make mathematical sense, but somehow somehow
Yeah,
raising your standards and saying, "No, I'm gonna have someone really," and having to, like, also expand your idea of what is possible. That was such a big part of my own repatterning was, like, looking to relationship model even fictional ones, even, like, Morticia and Gomez Adams, you know? I was like,
mhm,
"I want that level of love and passion and security and, like, all the things,"
yeah.
and being able to be like, "No, that's possible. There are people out there who want that too." And I'm actually blocking myself from those people by imagining that either they don't exist or that I can only do as well as this sort of more compromising energy of like, well, this person will really wanna stay with me because they're not doing so great on their own, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's so real. Cause like and I had to go through the same thing, and honestly, like, some people never, like, evolve past that, like, honestly, regardless of age, but I think that it's, like, my core self, like, little Gianna, like, inner child Gianna. she's like a big lover girl giver, like so generous, so thoughtful, like so loving. And I had to learn like discernment of like when someone wasn't valuing me or like coming in with like reciprocity and like respect, that that wasn't a sign to give more love, to get them to and to just be like more loving to get them to finally value me. No, because like 9 times out of 10, and it's a little bit more complex than this, but a lot of the times, like, people don't this is, like, very common with, like, codependency and, like, even, if you wanna teeter into, like, topics of, like, addiction as well, but it's, like, a lot of the times, like, people don't change when they're enabled, you know what I mean? Like, they kinda have to have a bit of, like, stark reality where it's, like, no, like, you don't get more love when you're an asshole, or you don't get more love and, like, warmth and generosity when you don't, like, nourish this and, like, respect and appreciate and reciprocate to that source of like warmth and generosity and love and kindness, right? That's kind of a shift that we have to start to make where the way it's like positioning yourself, like the way that and this isn't something that you have to like overly think about strategically. It's just something that you do when you do like when this concept lands and you do just respect yourself and value yourself, where it's like the same thing. And this like again, like this applies to like business, I feel like, but it also applies to relationships. The way that we unconsciously position ourselves like creates how people treat us. I've had clients who, and again, I don't view people from this lens, but I'm going to like kind of speak to the common mentality out there, which is like, oh, I bet that woman who is like very successful and like in her late 20s, early 30s, and like looks like a Victoria's Secret model. Or a Kardashian or whatever the beauty standards are now. Like men just, are falling to her feet, or like that woman who is like older and like doesn't have a lot of money and like doesn't have like abs, like she probably just has to like beg for love. Not necessarily. Like I've had clients who would fit the archetype of the first woman who have had just really atrocious experiences with men, because it's not about like the boxes you check, it's about the energy that you bring forward. And like I have a recent client example of this woman who is in her 60s, and we did some like relationship work for her post divorce, and she like I wasn't surprised, but I just like was so giddy and like had so much fun seeing it, where it's like men of all different like age ranges and like really successful, loving, generous men were just like pursuing the hell out of her. And it was because and she's now in a partnership and very happy. But she's now like a lot of the times it's like people think that you have to be perceived a certain way. And it's so much not about that. It's the way that you carry yourself. It's the way that you like unconsciously position yourself that determines like how people treat you, and like also like how you allow people to treat you, because it's like it's so much about just the way that you carry yourself.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed in a lot of your content is you use the word soulmate a lot, like soulmate
Mhm.
connection, soulmate relationship. And I'm sure like there's a lot of different ways that soulmate can be defined. And I
Mhm.
love like looking at all perspectives. So I'm just curious, what is your personal definition of a soulmate?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a soulmate, and don't get me wrong, like I definitely believe there are people that we journey with through many lifetimes and they take on like an unconditional role in your life to maybe like wound the fuck out of you to like help you be more self-aware of the things that are going on within you, and there's an unconditional soul level love in that. But to me, like a soulmate that I wish for everyone is the person who comes into your life when you're at a place of healthy, like reciprocal partnership. And it's someone who can see you and understands you and like values your unique characteristics and traits, and also like complements your life and like fits into like what you need for yourself to be your best self, but also like adds to it and you do the same for them. And so that's really like I think that there's a certain kind of like soulmate that I talk about that comes in when you're at a place of like secure attachment, like self-love, polarity embodiment that feels authentic and right for you, as far as like masculine, feminine energies. And then it's like you also know yourself, you know what you want. And then it's like the universe kind of sends in that person that like largely fits you and then probably checks a few other boxes that you didn't even like consciously think about. It's like a little surprise and delight from the universe, if you will. And that's the person that you can really have longevity with. That's what I would determine a soulmate as, and the way I talk about it anyways.
Nice. So it sounds like for you, a soulmate is essentially like when you have removed perhaps the conditioning, like the scaffolding, the patterning that you may have picked up through wounding, through trauma throughout your life or just through like your life experience. When you clear that distortion away so that your own soul is a very clear resonant frequency, then you attract someone who has that same clear frequency so your souls can meet. Does that sound like kind of what you're talking about?
Yes.
I love that. It's so fun. Like, and I know like we've talked about this too. Like one of the things that I'm a big, big, big believer in is just the idea that like we are not our patterning. We are not our programming. And so I also recognize that there are people who come into our lives. There are people like you said who are like they're soulmates, but they actually come in to teach you a lesson. Like you meet up in this lifetime to be like, oh no, I don't want that. And like there's theories out there that like it's like those are the people who actually love you the most on a soul level because they're willing to be rejected by you in this lifetime so that you can
Hmm.
learn this karmic lesson. In some ways, it's a gift. And I know that can
Yeah.
sound a little bypassy, but like there's a part of that that also resonates with me on sort of like a non-dual level that I kind of like.
Yeah.
And then there's also people that I feel like maybe like we have traveled through lifetimes before and maybe their soul just happened to pick up a lot of programming or patterning along the way. Maybe they went through a lot of abuse as a kid. Maybe they're struggling with addiction. Maybe they, whatever patterns that they have. And what I love about where we agree on this is that my feeling is like that person can still be your soulmate, but it still requires you getting in both parties getting into that clear resonant frequency before the relationship will actually work. So even if there
Hmm.
is someone who's like, oh, that person who, like there's all those memes online that are like, oh, that guy who's like not calling you back, or like the dude who's like, whatever, drug dealer you're obsessed with this week or whatever is like not your soulmate. And I'm
Yeah.
always like, not
It's a little bit
necessarily
more
because
nuanced. Yeah.
yeah, your soulmate can pick up these patterns too, but the important part is that you're not using the soulmate connection to justify harm or abuse or distortion or lack of resonance in the relationship or like bad behavior
Hmm.
on their part or your part. It's like, okay, if that is your soulmate, then you better get super clear because like you were saying before, it's only when you get this clear in yourself, like enabling people doesn't help. You better like be the lighthouse, not the life raft, right? And
Yeah.
like get so clear and bright that that person, if they are your soulmate, will be inspired by you and be like, oh damn, I got to step it up, right?
Yeah, I mean, amen, and, I feel like last time when we hung out in LA, like, we had such a deep conversation like, along this thread that I loved so much,
Oh my god,
and,
me too.
yeah, and I was like, "Damn," like, Arden gets it, like, the complexities and the nuance because it's like people can be so black and white with relationships where it's like, like something I used to say like earlier in my relationship coaching work a lot that we would kind of like have, I feel like funny side conversations about where I'd be like, oh my God, like the over romanticization of twin flame conversations. And it's like, I get it. And again, like there can be truth to that. But it's like also too, people like who are kind of like longing for connection and feel like a bit of desperation for love and like connection and belonging and maybe have like codependent patterns and like anxious attachment patterns like it can be a little bit of an unconscious not that this is like the intention of like twin flame culture necessarily but it's like a lot of the times people can use that as a justification to just stay super hyper fixated on a certain relationship and a certain connection that like honestly in a different place you probably wouldn't even want that connection but then it takes a lot of self-awareness because and this I'm so excited to even like say this but I know you're gonna get this and I yeah it's just so juicy it's something I get asked a lot or I've been asked a lot about over the years is like can you manifest a specific person right and I'm like the reality is like if you are someone who deeply knows yourself you're deeply intuitive and like like your patterns, where you tend to get anxious or avoidant or like give your power away or like self abandonment or whatever it is. If you're overall in a good place and you feel a certain kind of spark or a certain kind of connection with someone, there is a level of recognition in that. There can when you truly are a conscious person, sometimes you're like, I'm recognizing my person and like their circumstances and my circumstances are not in alignment yet. And so like I can manifest that person because they are a manifestation of an embodiment of my deepest, like, soul's truth in partnership, and I can, like, smell it on them. And so in that regard, like, when you do come even more into integration with your most authentic self, like, you can call that person in, and people do it. I've seen it. I've helped people with it. But a lot of the times, and I'm telling most of the time, these people, like, are honestly in delusion, and they're in just, like, self-deception and self-betrayal because they're using that relationship as, like, a way to bypass, like, these things that they need to work on. And this is why 9 times out of 10, I say to clients, don't hyper focus on a certain person, focus on the archetype and the essence, the energetic essence of what you want, because if it is that person, you can be open to them, they will come in. But if it's not, then they will fall away, and that tends to be what happens because a lot of the times a lot of people don't have, and it's not that they're not capable of it, but it's like a lot of the times people aren't hyper fixating and, like, getting obsessed with certain people from a place of true soul recognition. It's like codependency, it's anxious attachment, it's like they're your traumas are are very, compatible, if you will, right? And so I love that you kind of brought up like that nuance because it's like a lot of the time people are either one boat or the other, where it's like, oh, like that incredibly harmful to my well-being person is the one, or they're definitely not the one because they would respect me if he wanted to, he would. And life tends to be a little bit more nuanced and complex than that. And people have issues, and it's so much about like the energy and the standards and the boundaries that you bring into the connection that determine like the real health and longevity of the connection. And something I say a lot in my work is like the way in which and this is why, like, being single is, like, honestly so fun because 'cause I'm like, I can literally attract whatever the fuck I want. You know what I mean? Like, it's like I can literally attract whatever the fuck I want because of the energy, like, I put out. And, like, someone can in my last relationship is an example of this, where it's like he's told me, he was like, "I thought I was, like, damaged and was just this emotionally avoidant person," but, like, he had this cycle of being, like, the avoidant in, like, an anxious avoidant dynamic. And I, like, came forward to him, and granted, I think that, like, the stars aligned circumstantially to where we were a little bit more, like, disarmed with each other, but, like, I brought in, like, more of a secure attachment, and also there was just an innate, authentic connection there, and so, like, he was not avoidant with me at all. It was quite the opposite. Like, he was very secure. Like, if anything, if I got a little avoidant, he'd be like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, you felt that, huh?" Like, and so it's like your energy impacts so much of what you experience.
One of the things that Neil Strauss said, not in his book, The Game, but in his sort of follow-up book, The Truth, which sadly was not nearly as popular as The Game was,
Mhm,
and because The Truth, it's a really great book, and one of the things that he says in it is, "Trust is a leash that gets longer the less you pull on it."
mhm.
That idea of, like, if you're not constant like, you don't get it's literally an energetic push-pull thing, right? It's like if you're not tugging on someone for constant, like, validation or, like, need for security, like, there it's like, "Oh, hey, where'd you go?" Like, you give them the space to come back. And I wanna also talk about, like, you mentioned twin flame culture, and I'm just gonna say it, man, like, twin flame culture is messed the F up. Like, it is and it's because there are so many I'll just say it, there's so many cults out there because there are so many people who are especially in the dysregulated times that we are living in, there are so many people who are searching for that regulation or security in a relationship and what they think of as a soulmate relationship, and there are so many people who are mistaking that limerence or that feeling of a high for a soulmate connection when it isn't, right? When it's just like, as you said, either your traumas meeting or that spark of attraction or whatever it is, because they haven't really experienced what a soulmate connection actually feels like. So they're like, this must be it because it feels so intense. And so there's quite literally cults out there that capitalize on that. And
Mhm,
they're selling, and this is why it makes me so angry because I'm someone who has been on the twin flame path. And when I started on it, gosh, roughly 10 years ago now, I felt like I was out of my mind. I was getting all these signs about like, "Oh, this is the twin flame path, just do it." And, because, like, everything that I saw and read about it in the culture just felt so backwards. But I'm so very grateful that, like, somehow I learned at least, like, the theory of it. And the theory of the twin
mhm.
flame path of what you're supposed to do is it goes like, okay, you meet this person and immediately all, like, your wounding and patterning comes up because there is this frequency of love between you, but things are not gonna work if you're both in these kind of anxious avoidant polarities, and you've got to both get into balance. And so you do the inner work, you release the patterning that is, distorting that sort of soul frequency that we were talking about. And they're like, and if you get there, like if you get to that place, then the other person should too, because you have that cord between the two of you. And in my experience, it doesn't go at the same time necessarily, but the key is, and this is how, like, as a chaos magician, my practice of chaos magic is built on the foundation of the idea that I choose the beliefs that get me the results that I want. And what I found with the twin flame path is the only belief that got me to that place of total non attachment and just, worrying about myself was the belief that your twin flame is not necessarily one person. It is whoever you attract when you are in this frequency of resonance, because you may go through this. And the funny thing was, Gianna, I I got to a place where I'm like, actually, I don't think that belief is categorically true, but it has to be the belief in practice, because
Mm,
you can't know if that person really is that person or not unless you are 100% willing to let them go. If you're
mhm.
100% willing to be like, I'm just going to get there and see, I'm going to get there
Yeah,
myself. And if it's not them, then I was wrong about it. And it was just limerence. And I don't want them if they're not actually that soul connection. And the only way to find that soul connection is to get there. So I went
yeah,
through phases where I was like, oh, maybe I'm going through a few different twins who are simply my mathematical polar opposite of whatever reflection of the work that
mhm.
I've done on myself. And that
Yeah,
was the belief that got me to that place. And, like, I'm not ready, like, I'll just say for listeners, whatever. I'm not ready to tell that full story yet. And also, like, I want to focus this on Gianna and, like, not on me. But I just want to validate the fact that, like, every twin flame thing that I saw out there, so much of it was just like, but they're your twin flame. You must fight for this connection. I'm like, that is the mathematical opposite of what you need to do. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So part of my
Mm,
whole thing is like going forward into a lot of what I'm going to be doing is like I just want to rewrite the culture's entire notion of what twin flames are and what the path is to actually do it. Because it turns out actually if you do it that way, like it works one way or another. Either they are your twin flame and then like stuff happens, or they weren't your twin flame. And so you attract an amazing person from this place that you're in this soul frequency resonance place of at that point. Like either way you win, you know what I mean?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Like, something that I just love everything that you spoke to, and I love the term chaos magician. Like, I'm gonna need to know more about that at some point. Like, maybe like
Oh, yeah.
when I see
It
you
just means,
next.
like, we choose the beliefs that get us the results that we want. Like, we measure our beliefs and practices by the results that they get us.
Just that title like resonates with something in me that I need to explore further. So to be
I love
continued.
that. Totally
But
down.
yeah, love it. But something that like I feel to be deeply true for me is like I know that like my soul came here to do certain things in this life that like I chose before I incarnated in this physical body. Like I deeply believe that, and deeply believe part of like my dharma in this lifetime for like collective good, but also for like what my soul is meant to evolve into in this life. Like relationships and romantic relationships are a big part of that journey and that experience for me. And so for me, it was never going to be my path to just like marry the high school sweetheart. You know what I mean? Like I think my soul's path has been to like, I needed to experience a lot of things to, like, activate past life wisdom that I already have, and, like, some of it that was just already innately there, and I think my childhood really, like, activated 'cause this is something that, like, I kinda, like, channeled, if you will, at one point, which is, because also for side context here, like, I was raised by a psychic medium, so I also have that, like, element of my existence that's, like, intuitive. But something that I deeply believe is that, like, sometimes, like, we experience things, like, very early in life that are meant to, like, turn on certain things that we've already kind of had in past lives that we've already mastered that are a part of, like, our souls, like, just things that we've already mastered and been embodied in, they just get turned on really quickly, right? And we're meant to have those be active and activated for, like, whatever we're supposed to be doing have in this life. And, like, something that I've seen, for example, with that is, like, clients who I feel like they get initiated in their childhood to be really enmeshed. But I think that like the purpose of that is to activate their intuition to be able to like be sensitive to other people's energy, but they're meant to keep that sensitivity without the self-abandonment and integrate that. But something that I have known to be true is that for me personally, in my own journey with relationships, is like the thing that I always go back to is like, I'm going to like listen to myself and like take care of myself and be true to myself and like myself and love myself and respect myself. And whoever that like leads me to and leads me away from, like I will always fucking trust that. And like along the way, like I've learned so much like relationship nuance and complexity around that where it's like, okay, like, it's not just a black and white, like, oh, I healed myself and now like I don't attract like fuckboys or like avoidance or like whatever anymore. It's like people are a bit more complex than that. And like, I definitely believe sometimes it's like we feel called to like stay open to a connection. And like as we like stay true to ourselves, like that connection can elevate with us. And like, you know, and there's so much more like nuance and complexity to relationships. Like, maybe you can like recognize the essence of someone who is married, but they're not happily married. But again, that's where we get into some tricky waters because a lot of the times it's like, do you actually is that married person like your beloved, or is there something in you that is self-sabotage into available connections, and like this person, in the back of your mind you could never have them, and so you feel compelled to just like drop your wall because there's no real risk, you know what I mean? So it's like you kind of have to be able to really really get to know yourself and really really call yourself the fuck out to be able to navigate like a bit of those complex, nuanced waters, if you will.
Yeah, and I love that the path forward for both of those possibilities is actually the same. Like, you don't have
Mhm,
to know when you're in that space of, like, crush and limerence and whatever, which, like, I've been there. I was on that was,
mhm,
very much, in the beginning when I was getting all these signs of, like, "No, this is the thing, but you need to work on yourself, and you need to do this path, and you need to not focus on this person or whatever. You actually need to detach and get yourself into that place," and, like, honestly, I did it just because I was curious. I was like, if this actually works, that's a game changer, you know?
yeah.
And so the path for but, like, either you work on yourself and you're like, "Oh, that was just me wanting an unavailable connection," or it was like, "Oh, no, I did this, and actually things shifted, and actually, like,
Yeah.
wow, I was right," or whatever.
Mhm, mhm. Juicy.
So I wanna
Some
ask
people
you
just don't
also a
go there.
question. What's that?
A lot of people, like, don't know how to like, it's like, I feel like when people typically talk about those conversations, people are either like, "He's married, girl, stop," or like, "Oh, yeah, like, it's definitely feed the twin flame to Lulu. Yes, he's the one." So I love this
Yeah.
nuanced conversation, but anyway.
Yeah, oh my god, me too. I'm so glad that we're talking about it all of this. I wanna ask you a question because I know you and I have, like, a very friendly, complementary disagreement, and that is on feminine men. And maybe, like,
Okay.
maybe we just have different definitions of what a feminine man is, but, for example and I know that, like, you've talked about, like, your work is for spiritually aware feminine women, like, women who identify as feminine, and I have a very strong feminine aspect, but I also have a very strong masculine aspect. I feel, like, really pretty balanced within myself, and I'm attracted to men who also have both of those, and I'm attracted to women too. I'm bisexual, pansexual, whatever. I've been attracted to many different types of people. But the place where I feel really the strongest attractions are to men who have a really strong feminine and a strong masculine. So they complement
Mhm,
me. Like they have both of those complementary things to complement me as well. And I've seen like sometimes you'll describe like a feminine man as like a man who isn't capable of taking initiative or like being a leader in the relationship. And that's important to me too. Like I obviously I want someone who is going to have that sort of strong basis. But there's also times that like I like to take the lead or I like to make plans or I
mhm,
like to do things like that. And so I'm wondering, I guess my question is like a bit of a two-parter. Like, first of all, what is it that you mean when you talk about a feminine man in a way that like you're saying is not ideal in a relationship? And then what sort of maybe I don't know, advice or like how would your guidance differ for someone like me who has that sort of non-binary nature and is attracted to people who have both of those sort of masculine and feminine poles?
Believe it or not, like, and, not to, like, reduce myself to astrology, but, I've got, like, a lot of Gemini placements, also Leo placements, but, I'm a very, like, curious person who can, like, really see, like, the value in so many things, and, like, I also have, like, attraction to women, I, like, I'm attracted to different aspects of different, like, qualities and frequencies in men, but to me, like, what it boils down to and, like, one thing I wanna say before I a little caveat here is I innately will don't believe in telling other people, like, what is their correct embodiment or in who they are in relationship. I think that that is our sovereign right to know and choose for ourselves. Because 'cause I'm not here to say, like, "Oh, like, the way that you're wired or, like, the way that you that's wounding, that's trauma." Like, sometimes it is, like, I was definitely, like, in the past when I was younger, I was very much a self-abandoning, codependent woman. That wasn't me. That was trauma. And then there was times where I overcompensated into like a hyper independence and like a more masculine energy, if you will, where I always had to be in control in relationships. I was making the decision. And to a point that felt good because I felt my sovereignty and my independence in that I previously didn't feel inside of myself. But it got to a point where in partnership I felt like overextended and I was like over functioning. And I think that that's a real issue for a lot of women in like traditional, like heteronormative dynamics, where when you think of like the typical relationship dream that a lot of people will have, which is like get married, have kids, like build a home together, and then when you start to talk about the labor around a home or like emotional labor in a relationship, I think for women who want something like somewhat traditional in that way, feminine energy embodied in themselves and like a masculine partner is very important because otherwise that's where that like statistic comes from where it's like women who get married and have children life expectancy goes down and for a man it goes up and like correlation is not causation, right? Like I think it's the underbelly, the underworkings that feed into that outcome, and for a lot of the times it's women being unconsciously so conditioned to just, like, pick up the slack, like, emotionally and around the home, and so there's just certain things that like, I think especially, like, when children are involved, like, there's just certain things, and I've witnessed this with my sister who just had a baby, like, a few years ago, where it's like there's certain things, like, no matter how much your partner, like, wants to help and, like, wants to have your back and, like, wants to take something on for you, there's just, like, biological elements where the child, like, needs the mom to do it, right? Where it's, like, the breastfeeding, right? Like, the baby doesn't take the bottle, like, there's just certain things that, like, where I think a woman, like, when she is in that role, like, wants to be, and I'm not speaking for everyone here, obviously, but, like, she wants to be able to be that present, like, nurturing, available, nourishing figure, but it's like, if she's taking on, like, so much more in a relationship dynamic and in a home, like, her life force is just being immensely depleted, and so I think that it's like, it's really up to you, like, as an individual to decide, you can appreciate and, like, feel attraction for, like, multiple different types of things, but it's like, at the end of the day, like, who do you wanna be and, like, what is the life that you wanna live and, like, what partner is really complementary to that? And for a lot of women that I've worked with, like, around feminine energy, it's like they typically have been a woman where they're over functioning a lot, and it's like they have a hard time giving up control, and they often are lacking trust and respect towards, like, towards, like, the masculine in the relationship, and that has to be cultivated, and it's often a past projection of old wounds. But I think for men, it's like, and again, like, I think there's people who are just wired a bit differently and feel called to, like, live life a certain way, and that's fucking great, and I think that's divine, I think that's perfect, I think that's what you're supposed to do, and be and have, but it's like, sometimes I think that there are just like women can have wounding that causes them to overfunction, I feel like men can have and these are just generalized statements, obviously. I think men sometimes, in my experience, and I've had male clients too, and I've also seen how my clients in partnership, like their masculine started to shift as they shifted these feminine energy. But it's like I do believe sometimes, and there's different factors that go into it. It can be like health, hormones, it can be trauma, but it's like where men like innately would feel some men would innately feel better like feeling more in this like masculine role, if you will, being able to make decisions, be decisive, take charge, and and handle certain things, but they don't because maybe they don't feel confident. They feel like a bit emasculated. And maybe that started young, like in their childhood with their relationship with their mother, where their mom was always like jumping down their throat and they go into their wounded little like inner little boy that's like, I'm just shutting down and I'm gonna go play video games and go to my room, like that kind of energy and like the passive, like people pleasing man who's like, whatever you say, honey, whatever you say, honey. And it's like that might avoid conflict, but it's not like healthy relationship structure for that kind of dynamic. So at the end of the day, like to be honest, I know you said like a playful, respectful like disagreement. Like I think we are actually like more in alignment than maybe we thought we were. I think that it's just yeah, like a bit more nuanced. And I just think it boils down to like personal preference. Cause again, like, I don't believe because that's, like, Republican shit to me, like, this is how, like, this is your role as a man, that's your role as a woman, and if you're not that role, there's something wrong with you and you need to heal, like, I don't believe in that, like, I think that that's our own choice, that's our own, like, whatever like, I don't know your soul calling better than you do, but, like, if something that I say, like, resonates with you, hell yeah, I got your back, I can we can work on it.
It sounds like your definition of feminine in this context is like a feminine man that is in a not so great way, is someone who is maybe kind of avoid it's almost like an anxious avoidant polarity, but instead of it being the push-pull between like attention and attachment, it's the push-pull between making effort in the relationship. That the
Mhm,
woman in some dynamics like this has to overcompensate for a lot of leadership because the man feels afraid to step up. And it's so funny because when I think of feminine men, I think of artists and creatives. I think of like Prince. I think of David
mhm,
Bowie. I think of men who actually have accomplished incredible things. And like in David Bowie's case, was completely devoted to his partner, right?
mhm,
I think
mhm,
also of like in more contemporary standards, I think of like right now, like K-pop is having such a surge, in the US, like
mhm,
probably thanks to K-pop Demon Hunters, which is such a great movie. And I look at the culture of that. I got so interested in being like, oh, like this is really neat. What's this? And the the K-pop idols, like the men who are K-pop idols, like they work so hard. Like the amount of creativity that they have to put out on such a like crazy schedule and everything like that. It's like the last thing that they are is passive, right? But they have to
mhm,
be sort of like everything. They have to be hard, but they have to be soft, and they have to be cute, but they have to be sexy, and they have to be all these. I'm like, and I look at that, I respect that so much because of my
mhm,
former work as like a dating coach. I remember like holding myself to being able to be all of these different archetypes in order to, to be attractive and to channel that into a creative career is just like it's just such an amazing feat. So I don't think of
mhm,
femininity in men as anything about slacking off. I feel like it's a cultivation of intuition and a
mhm.
cultivation of attractiveness in a way that a lot of overly masculine men often don't think about. Like they might dress up in a suit, they might look good, right? They might be like a
Yeah.
football player on the field, people might be into that, but feminine men with a strong feminine aspect, like they think
Mhm.
about style and aesthetic in like a completely
Yeah.
different way. And as a woman, I'm like, I feel seen by that. Like you
Yeah.
actually know how much effort I put into myself. I'm not just like doing this for someone who doesn't get it. So
Yeah.
yeah, so maybe that's where we ultimately agree. We just have different semantic definitions of what feminine means.
I think that it is a bit like semantics is a good word for it because it's like, is that feminine energy or is it wounded masculine? Because like whenever I talk to clients about like masculine and feminine energy, I always go back to the example where it's like we need both, right? And I think we should all have both inside of us, right? Where it's like the feminine is like the intuition, she's the flow, she's the and I think we should all have like both, right? But it's like overall, like in the relationship container, like the feminine woman takes on more of these traits and or embodies more of them in the relationship dynamic. But she's the intuition, she's the flow, she's like the intuitive oracle, she's the feeler, she's the presence, she's the sensuality, she's like in the present moment. And then, and she's like the river flowing through the riverbank, whereas like the masculine is the structure, he's the container, he's the riverbank that holds the water, right? And so it's like he might be more of like the problem solver, the linear thinker, like the the action taker, the leader or whatever, but it doesn't mean that like she doesn't have those traits and it doesn't mean that he doesn't have those traits, but it's like that's where they kind of complement and support each other really well. And then it's like, the feminine without the riverbank, right? The water, she just turns into a puddle and evaporates. Whereas like the masculine without the river, like he's just like an ugly, dirty ditch, right? You know what I mean? Like so it's like we need both, right? And it's like we all have, and I think we all have like both, but it's like I know for me specifically, because I had a relationship like this where I really got like I really loved like the emotional element to a man, like at the time, because I had previously only dated like avoidance. Yeah, I kind of like went from one extreme to the other in a way where it's like I felt like I was just being this big like emotional space holder. And so it's like to me it was like a fine line between in my own relationship experience of like, okay, like I love a man who's aware and in touch with his emotion and is creative, but ultimately his emotions like don't hijack his ability to like keep his eye on the prize, to be able to like be focused, to like lead himself in his life, to have like ambition, to have focus and drive and will and like goals. And you know what I mean? And so I think it ultimately does boil down to a bit of semantics for sure. But I like it. I love that we're like fleshing this out.
Me too. Oh my god, I've wanted to like have this conversation with you for a while because I know just to my listeners out there, like Gianna and I also like we always joke that like if we ever go out together, like we will never compete for the same man. Like we will be the best wing woman because we have completely very different types. So we're gonna when she moves to LA, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. When that day happens, we're gonna be the best wing women ever. Well, I want to bring on our producer, Tomi, to ask her question at the end of the episode. And we've gone like over, but I love the fact like I didn't want to stop this conversation, even though I try to keep the episodes around an hour, but like we were in flow and it was so great. So, but now I'll go ahead and hand it over to Tomi to ask her question.
Yeah, I would like to circle back to the like feminine man, masculine woman dynamic, and I'd be curious your thoughts on how you think that applies to trans people. Like,
Yeah, for
personally,
sure.
I'm someone who I was only able to start accomplishing things in life or like really put myself in that position of power as I embraced the feminine side that I was often made to feel ashamed of or like
Yeah.
had to suppress. So like I don't know how much you work with trans clients, but I'd love to know how you think that plays into that dynamic.
Yeah. No, I love this question. Yeah. I mean, I've had all different kinds of clients over the years, LGBTQ plus, like all the things. And what I really come back to is like again, like I really, really just think that it's up to us to be like our authentic expression of who we are in life and in relationships. And so I don't believe in telling people like you need to be more masculine in this way, you need to be more feminine in that way. But it's like I think sometimes if we have like an attraction towards like I'll use myself as an example, like I have always been attracted to masculine men, but it's like when I was younger, I had a lot of like abuse through like a masculine father figure growing up. And as a result, like I kind of would be like have this push pull with masculine men. And so I would be like, I'm just gonna date people who aren't really like direct and don't like have this like authoritative presence because I associated that like authoritative presence with abuse, right? And like not feeling safe. And so I kind of like went to the opposite extreme and would like date men that were very passive. And then I would find like, oh, I'm so like depleted in this dynamic because it doesn't feel compatible with my like authentic wiring. Right. And so for me, like my journey personally was doing that work to be like, what do I really want? Who am I really? And like, who's going to fit me the best ultimately in a relationship dynamic, Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
uh, well, if there's anything you want me to clarify,
Mm.
just let me know.
And maybe ultimately I think that's like the common theme of what this discussion kind of wraps up to, like especially as we're wrapping up, is Tommy that for you like femininity is your that authentic soul resonance expression for you. So for you like being in your femininity and attracting a partner that maybe mirrors you in a way that is appropriate like for your own soul, like that is resonant with your own soul. And like for me being non-binary, the fact that I'm attracted to people who are also like rather androgynous, like I am. And for Gianna being someone who is hyper feminine, again, like I was like, oh, I'm shocked she's not wearing pink today. It's the only time I've maybe seen you like not wearing pink, to be able to attract what you want. And that at the end of the day, it really is about removing the programming and conditioning that tells you that you need to be anything that you aren't. And that when you are in that soul frequency, that's when you do attract the things that are most resonant and bring you the most joy. Gianna, I want to thank you so much for being on this conversation today. Is there anything I didn't mention before about like where people can find you or what else they should check out of yours?
First of all, thank you so much for having me, both of you. And yeah, no, I mean, the website, the gram, I'm on Facebook as well. But yeah, I mean, if there's anything like in the conversation that really resonated with you and you want to connect, like you're more than welcome to reach out to me in the DMs on any platform that you find me on. So feel free to do that.
Yay. Well, thank you once again for being here. And again, I am counting down the days till you're in Los Angeles,
Me
whether,
too.
temporarily or maybe perhaps permanently for a little while.
Yes, to be
And
continued.
yes, exactly. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. And we will see you next time on the Repatterning Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Repatterning Podcast. If you're curious about the Repatterning Project, the 8-week course in mental mastery and creative freedom that inspires these conversations, you can check out more details at therepatterningproject.com. We run a cohort twice a year, or you can download the self-study version of the course and get started today. We also offer a 4-week course on narrative magic and archetype titled Myths and Magic, Changing Your Life Through Story, also twice a year. If you'd like to join our community, the Repatterning Parlor, on Discord, you can sign up for $5 a month at patreon.com/the Repatterning Podcast. Thanks to everyone who makes the Repatterning Podcast possible. Firstly, our award-winning producer, Tomi Trembath of the Keymaster Collective network of podcasts. She also produces Transcending Comics, Vision in the Void, and Giant-Sized Violence. Thanks also to animation studio Mortis and Madriax, who created the video for our introduction, as well as to Andrew Means, who composed and produced our theme music. And also thanks to Al Alvarez, who took the photos of yours truly that you see on the cover of each episode if you're watching the video version. And finally, thanks to you, our listeners, who give meaning to this work. Our greatest wish is that whatever you've heard today inspires you to live freely and begin creating your reality from the inside out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.